A family day at the mall. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when Marcus Johnson decided to take a break from his busy routine and spend the day with his children. For weeks, he had been caught up in work, meetings, and the constant demands of life. But today, he wanted to make memories. He wanted to create moments of joy with his kids, something to remind them all of the simple pleasures in life. Jamal, his 10-year-old son, had been talking nonstop about the latest superhero action figures and how he wanted to check out the toy store at the mall. Nadia, his 7-year-old daughter, was more interested in the clothes and accessory stores, eager to try on pretty dresses and explore the latest trends. Marcus loved seeing his children excited. It warmed his heart to know that, even with the challenges of life, they still had a sense of wonder and excitement in the world around them. As they made their way into the mall, the bright lights and bustling atmosphere welcomed them. The mall was crowded with families, couples, and friends, all enjoying their weekend. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, chatter, and the soft hum of music from the nearby stores. Marcus could feel the weight of the world lift from his shoulders as he took in the vibrant scene, his mind temporarily free from worries of work and life's constant struggles. "Let's go check out the toy store first," Jamal suggested eagerly, tugging at his father's arm. Marcus laughed, gently pulling him back into step. All right, Jamal. But after that, we have to go get some ice cream. Your sister's already talking about sprinkles." Nadia, who was walking beside them, smiled shyly and nodded. "I want vanilla, Daddy," she added, her voice soft with excitement. "Vanilla it is, with lots of sprinkles," Marcus replied, giving her a wink. The warmth of her innocent joy made him smile even wider. As they walked toward the toy store, Marcus noticed the mall's security officers patrolling the area. He had seen them around before, but today, something felt different. There was an underlying tension in the air. Marcus couldn't quite place it, but he had learned to trust his instincts. He brushed it off, assuming it was just the normal hustle and bustle of the weekend crowd. "Dad, look, the newest Iron Man figure," Jamal called out, pointing excitedly toward a shelf in the toy store. Marcus smiled as he followed his son into the store. He loved watching Jamal's enthusiasm as he picked out his favorite toys. Marcus had always believed that, despite the world's harsh realities, childhood should be a time of joy, of being able to dream big and live without fear. He allowed Jamal to browse, while Nadia wandered around, looking at the colorful dolls and stuffed animals. They were a beautiful family, each of them unique in their own way. Jamal, with his boundless energy and curious mind, was growing into a young man with a heart full of dreams. Nadia, on the other hand, was quiet but fierce, with a sensitivity that Marcus admired. She cared deeply about the people around her and always wanted to help. For Marcus, days like this reminded him of how much he loved being a father. Life had been difficult at times, especially for a black man trying to make his way in the world. But moments like these, where everything felt right, where his children's laughter filled the air, made it all worthwhile. After some time, they left the toy store, Jamal clutching his new action figure. "Can we go to the ice cream shop now, Daddy?" he asked, bouncing on his feet with excitement. "Of course," Marcus replied, taking Nadia's hand. They made their way toward the food court, the sounds of people talking and the smell of freshly baked pretzels filling the air. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, filled with the ordinary yet precious moments of family life. As they approached the food court, Marcus couldn't help but notice the security officers again. This time, they seemed to be watching him more closely. It was subtle, but he felt it. A gaze lingering longer than necessary, a whisper among the officers. Marcus had been through this before. He knew what it felt like to be watched, to be judged by his appearance before anyone even knew his name. It wasn't the first time he had felt this kind of scrutiny, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But today, he wasn't going to let it ruin his time with his kids. They had earned this day of fun, and he wasn't about to let anyone spoil it. As they walked past a clothing store, Nadia tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a sparkly dress in the display window. "Daddy, can I try that on?" Marcus smiled, giving her a soft squeeze. "Maybe next time, sweetie. We'll get you a pretty dress soon, I promise." She smiled, her little hand wrapped around his, and they continued to the food court. But before they could reach the ice cream stand, one of the security officers approached. Marcus recognized him immediately. The man was tall, with short cropped hair and a stern look on his face. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes betrayed something more unsettling, an air of judgment. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said in a clipped tone, his eyes scanning Marcus. "We need to speak with you for a moment." Marcus stopped in his tracks, feeling a jolt of confusion and anxiety. He looked down at his kids, who had stopped as well. Jamal was staring up at the officer with wide eyes, while Nadia's small face reflected confusion. "Is something wrong, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but with a slight edge. "We've received a report about suspicious activity," the officer said, his voice cool and impersonal. "Please come with us." Marcus frowned. "Suspicious activity? What are you talking about?" "I'm just here with my children." The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for Marcus to follow him. "It's just a standard procedure. Please come with us." The world around them seemed to blur. Marcus's heart raced. He had been here before, had seen others go through this kind of treatment. But he never thought it would happen to him. Not today. Not in front of his kids. He looked down at Jamal and Nadia, who were both staring at the officer with growing uncertainty. Nadia's small hand gripped his tightly. "Daddy, why is he talking to you like that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus knelt down to her level, his heart breaking. "It's okay, Nadia. I want you both to stay right here with me, all right? I'm going to figure this out." The officer didn't wait for Marcus to respond. Instead, he motioned for him to follow. The discomfort that had been building inside Marcus suddenly turned to anger. He knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something deeper, something painful. But as he walked toward the back of the mall, he knew he couldn't lose his cool. Not in front of his kids, not in front of anyone. This was his chance to show them what it meant to stand up for dignity, to teach them how to respond when life wasn't fair. And that's exactly what he intended to do. A father's plea for dignity. As Marcus was guided toward the back of the mall, the atmosphere around him seemed to close in. The bright, bustling food court was now distant, replaced by a quiet, sterile hallway that led to a small security office. Marcus could feel the eyes of bystanders on him, watching as he was escorted like a criminal. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain composed. He was no stranger to being treated unfairly, to being cast as something he wasn't. But it hurt deeper this time, knowing that his children, his innocent children, were watching the whole thing unfold. Jamal's voice, shaky but filled with concern, reached his ears. "Dad, are they taking you to jail?" Jamal asked, his eyes wide with fear. Marcus's heart twisted, but he swallowed his emotions, crouching down to meet his son's gaze. He placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "No, son, they're not taking me to jail. Everything is going to be okay. Just stay here with your sister and wait for me." Nadia, too, looked up at him with confusion and growing concern. "Daddy, why are they doing this?" she asked, her voice small, like the voice of someone who had already learned too much about the harshness of the world. Marcus smiled gently, though his heart was heavy. "Sometimes people make mistakes, sweetie. And sometimes they don't treat us the way we deserve. But that doesn't mean we stop being good people." As the officer led him down the narrow corridor, Marcus tried to stay calm. He could feel his emotions bubbling beneath the surface, but he had to keep his composure. He couldn't lose his cool, not in front of his kids, and not in front of the people who were about to witness what was about to happen. They reached the security office, a small windowless room filled with a desk, a computer, and a few chairs. The officer who had spoken to Marcus earlier gestured for him to sit in one of the chairs, his tone flat and impersonal. "Wait here," he said curtly before leaving the room. Marcus took a seat, his mind racing. What had just happened? He had done nothing wrong. He had been simply walking through the mall with his children, enjoying their company. Was it because of the way he looked? Was it because he was black? The thought stung deep, but Marcus had learned to live with it. It was an unfortunate reality. A reality that he and so many others had faced for far too long. Minutes ticked by in silence, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Marcus's mind wandered to his children, still out in the mall, probably frightened and confused by what was happening. He wanted to be there for them, to hold them, and tell them everything would be okay. But he couldn't do that until he figured out what was going on here. He stood up and walked to the small window in the door, peering out into the hallway. He saw the two security officers talking in hushed tones near the entrance of the office, their backs turned to him. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He could feel the heaviness of the situation. It was more than just a mistake, more than just a misunderstanding. This was a moment that could define everything, not just for him, but for his children too. As he stood there, a realization hit him. This wasn't just about the officers' actions. It wasn't just about the way they had treated him based on his appearance. It was about something much bigger, a larger societal issue that had been festering for years. Racism, prejudice, and the biases that permeated every corner of society were still alive and well. It didn't matter how much he had accomplished in his life, how hard he worked, or how many people respected him. In the eyes of some, he was just another black man, one to be suspicious of, one to be wary of, even when he was doing nothing wrong. A few more minutes passed, and the door to the office opened. The officer who had first spoken to Marcus stepped back inside, followed by another officer, this one older, with graying hair and a more measured demeanor. The older officer, who seemed to be in charge, glanced at Marcus before sitting down at the desk. "Mr. Johnson, we've reviewed the situation," the older officer began, his voice calm but firm. "There seems to have been a mistake, but you need to understand that we are required to follow protocol when there is any suspicion." Marcus's gaze hardened. A mistake? A mistake about what? He asked, his voice steady, though the anger inside him was simmering. The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted in his seat and then leaned forward slightly. "There were reports of a man matching your description acting suspiciously near the jewelry store. We're required to investigate any potential threats or disturbances." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "My description? Acting suspiciously." His voice was measured now, but there was a biting edge to it. "I've been walking around the mall with my children for the past hour. I'm not acting suspiciously. I'm being a father. My kids are outside waiting for me. What I don't understand is why you stopped me in the first place." The officer looked uncomfortable, but he didn't back down. "Like I said, we're following procedure." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the officers. "I understand protocol. What I don't understand is why you think a black man is automatically suspicious because of the way he looks. Do you know how many times I've had to deal with this? Just because of my skin. Do you have any idea how it feels to be treated like you don't belong, like you're guilty of something you didn't do, simply because of who you are?" The older officer shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward the younger officer. But Marcus didn't stop. "You see, that's the problem. It's not just a mistake. It's something deeper. It's ingrained. People like me get treated like criminals all the time, even when we're just living our lives, and I'm sick of it." The younger officer looked uncomfortable, but remained silent. The older officer let out a slow sigh, then turned his attention back to Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, we apologize for the misunderstanding. We'll let you go, but we ask that you remain calm while we process this." Calm? How could he remain calm when he had just been humiliated in front of his kids? How could he pretend that this wasn't a problem, that this wasn't yet another example of how the world saw him differently just because of his skin color? Marcus could feel the anger rising within him, but he took a deep breath, willing himself to stay in control. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his children, who were waiting for him outside, who had witnessed everything. He needed to be strong for them, to show them that even in moments like this, they could rise above the hate and the ignorance. "I'm done here," Marcus finally said, his voice cold. "But I want you to understand something. This isn't just about me. It's about every black man, every black woman, every child who has to deal with this every single day. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a reality that people like me face, and it's time for that to change." The older officer nodded slowly. "We understand. We'll review our procedures and ensure this doesn't happen again." Marcus stood up and walked toward the door, his mind racing. The apology felt hollow, but it was the best he was going to get for now. He wasn't here to win their approval. He was here to fight for dignity, for respect, and for a world where his children would never have to face this kind of treatment. As he stepped back into the hallway, he saw Jamal and Nadia waiting, their faces filled with worry. Marcus smiled at them, his heart swelling with love. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he knew he would reassure them. He would teach them the strength of character, the power of dignity, and the importance of standing up for what was right. The struggle for respect. As Marcus stepped out of the security office, he could feel the heavy weight of the situation pressing down on him. The hallway outside seemed quieter than before, the soft hum of overhead lights the only sound accompanying him as he walked toward the mall's exit. Jamal and Nadia stood nervously by the large pillar near the door, their faces etched with confusion and concern. His heart sank when he saw the look on their faces. They hadn't fully grasped what had just transpired, but they knew something wasn't right. Marcus took a deep breath, pushing the anger that had been building inside him back down. He didn't want to unleash it on his kids. Not now. Not when they were already scared. He forced a smile. The same smile he had given them throughout the years. The smile that told them everything would be okay, even when things seemed to be falling apart. "Hey guys. It's all right," Marcus said, his voice soft, trying to ease their fears. "I'm fine." But inside, Marcus was anything but fine. His mind was racing, replaying the moments when the officer had approached him, the way they had treated him like a criminal, as if he didn't belong, as if his mere presence in that mall with his kids was somehow a threat. It wasn't new to him, far from it. He had been through similar experiences before, but this time, something felt different. Something inside him had shifted. "Dad, what happened back there?" Jamal asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Why did they treat you like that?" Marcus knelt down to meet his son's eyes. He wanted to shield Jamal from the harsh realities of life, to tell him that everything was fine and that the world was a good place, but he couldn't lie to him. Jamal was old enough to see the truth, even if it was a painful one. "Sometimes, buddy," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully, "people see things about you that aren't true just because of how you look. Some people." He paused, glancing over at Nadia, who was looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "They don't always treat people fairly. They don't see the whole picture. And sometimes, we just have to show them who we are, not let them define us by what they think." Jamal nodded slowly, processing his father's words. He had always been a bright, observant child, but this was something he wasn't prepared to understand yet. Nadia, ever the more sensitive one, clung to her father's side, her little hand gripping his tightly. Marcus gently squeezed her hand and smiled down at her. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if his words could erase the hurt in her eyes. Nadia simply nodded, looking up at him. "Daddy, are we going home now?" Marcus stood up, pulling both of his children close to him in a tight hug. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he held his kids close, feeling their warmth and innocence in his arms. This moment, this family, was all that mattered. They would get through this together. "Yes, sweetie," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "We're going home. But first, we need to have a talk. A real one." As they made their way to the car, the air around them seemed to shift. It wasn't just the usual breeze that swept through the parking lot. It was something heavier, something laden with the unspoken tension of the world. Marcus could feel it in his bones, the sense that his children, who had always been so sheltered from the harshness of the world, had just had their eyes open to something they shouldn't have to witness. It broke his heart, but there was no avoiding it. Marcus knew that if he didn't talk to them now, they would grow up with questions, with anger they didn't know how to handle, with confusion they couldn't process. It was a conversation he had been avoiding for years, but now it was time. Now it was crucial that his children understood not just the unfairness of the world, but the importance of standing up for what's right. When they reached the car, Marcus opened the back door and helped Nadia climb into the booster seat. Jamal hopped in the front passenger seat, his face still reflecting the concern he felt for his father. Marcus settled into the driver's seat, buckled up, and took a deep breath. "Dad, can we talk about what happened?" Jamal asked quietly. "I don't understand. Why were they so mean to you?" Marcus looked at his son, the boy's eyes filled with both fear and curiosity. "Jamal," he began, his voice calm but firm, "it's because sometimes people judge you based on what they see, not who you really are. They don't take the time to understand you, to get to know you. And when they see someone who looks different from them, someone who has a different color of skin, they get scared. And fear makes people act in ways they shouldn't." Nadia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her small voice breaking through the silence. "So it's because you're black." Marcus nodded slowly, swallowing hard. He had always known this day would come, but he had hoped it would be a long time before his children had to face such a painful reality. But now, in this moment, with his kids looking to him for answers, he had to find the strength to speak the truth. "Yes, Nadia," he said softly. "It's because I'm black. But it's not just that. It's because sometimes people forget that we are all the same, that no matter what color our skin is, we all have hearts, we all have dreams, and we all deserve respect." Jamal, who had been listening intently, looked out the window, deep in thought. Marcus could see the gears turning in his son's mind. He wasn't just processing the words. He was trying to understand the implications of them. He was trying to understand why the world was so unjust, and that broke Marcus's heart. "So, what do we do about it, Dad?" Jamal asked, turning back toward him. "What if they keep treating us like that? What if they keep judging us?" Marcus felt a pang of sadness, but he knew this was the moment to instill strength in his children. "We stand tall, Jamal," Marcus replied, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "We don't let anyone define us by what they think we are. We show them who we are, with kindness, with dignity, and with strength. And when we see someone else being treated unfairly, we stand up for them. 2. We do our part to make the world a better place." Nadia looked up at him, her eyes full of wonder and a hint of fear. "But what if they don't listen, Daddy? What if they don't change?" Marcus's heart ached, but he didn't waver. "Not everyone will listen right away, sweetie. Change takes time. But we keep fighting. We keep showing up, doing the right thing, and teaching others to do the same. Eventually, they'll see." Jamal sat up straighter, a spark of determination flickering in his eyes. "So we fight back with kindness." Marcus smiled. "Exactly. Fighting doesn't always mean getting angry or hurting someone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain calm, remain kind, and let your actions speak louder than your words." They drove in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling in the car. The world outside the window was as busy as ever, but Marcus felt like he was in a different world, one where the lessons he was teaching his children would shape their futures. One where, no matter what happened, they would stand strong together. By the time they reached home, the sky was beginning to darken, casting a soft glow over the neighborhood. The world outside might have been filled with injustice and cruelty, but Marcus knew that as long as he had his children by his side, they would be okay. They would keep fighting, keep standing up for what was right, and keep spreading the message that love and respect could overcome anything. And as he looked at his kids, a sense of peace washed over him. They might not fully understand everything now, but one day they would. One day they would carry the lessons he was teaching them into the world. And that, Marcus knew, was the greatest legacy he could leave behind. The call for change. As the days passed following the incident at the mall, Marcus couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. He had hoped that it would fade into the background, that life would simply move on. But it didn't. The sting of being judged and treated unfairly, the way his children had been forced to witness that treatment, lingered in his mind. It wasn't just a personal affront. It was a stark reminder of the deep-seated racism that still permeated society, and it had shaken him to his core. He couldn't let it go. Not this time. Marcus was a man of action, someone who didn't sit idly by when things needed to change. He had always been a quiet advocate for social justice, but after what happened with his children in that mall, he felt a surge of urgency. He knew that, if nothing else, he had to take a stand for his kids and for every person who had ever been subjected to the same kind of treatment. That evening, as the kids settled in for bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he tried to find the right words to express what he had felt and witnessed. He knew this wasn't just about him. This was about every person who had ever been subjected to the kind of bias and discrimination that he had experienced. It was about the collective fight for equality, for dignity, for respect. He began typing. "I don't usually do this," Marcus typed, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I need to share something. Something that happened to me. Something that is still happening to so many of us. Yesterday I was treated differently, not because of anything I did, but because of how I look. I was in a mall, just a father enjoying time with his kids, when I was stopped by security. They didn't see me as a father. They saw me as a threat. A man who looked like me was judged, presumed guilty before I had even spoken a word. And worse, my children had to see it." He paused for a moment, reflecting on how his words could be received. He had never been one to openly share his struggles in such a public way, but something inside him had shifted. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future, about breaking the cycle of injustice that his children would inevitably face if things didn't change. He couldn't wait for the world to change on its own. He had to be part of that change. "I'm not writing this to seek pity," he continued, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm writing this because I want to remind everyone reading this that this kind of treatment happens every day to so many people, especially to Black men, women, and children. It happens because of fear. It happens because of stereotypes. And it happens because society still hasn't learned how to look at each other with dignity and respect. We're all human. And that should be enough. I'm asking for change. I'm asking for you to see people for who they are, not for what you fear they might be." Marcus sat back for a moment, taking in the weight of what he had written. He wasn't sure what would come of it, but he knew that the conversation needed to happen. It wasn't enough to sit quietly and hope things would get better. They never did. Change only happened when people spoke up, when they demanded it, when they made their voices heard. He hit send and immediately shared the post on his social media accounts. Within minutes, comments began flooding in, messages of support, stories of others who had been through similar experiences, and calls for action. It was clear that Marcus wasn't alone in his frustration. He wasn't the only one who had felt the sting of injustice, and that realization, seeing how widespread the pain was, only fueled his resolve. The post went viral, spreading like wildfire across the internet. People from all walks of life shared their own stories, tagging friends and family, offering their support, and demanding accountability. It wasn't just a message from Marcus anymore. It was a a call for change that resonated with people everywhere. Soon, Marcus was receiving messages from activists, organizations, and even people he had never met. Many of them encouraged him to continue speaking out, to use his platform to challenge the system. Others offered their expertise in organizing rallies, speaking engagements, and campaigns aimed at raising awareness about racial injustice. Marcus realized that this wasn't just about one incident. This was about a systemic problem that required a collective effort to fix. The next day, Marcus received a call from a prominent civil rights organization, asking if he would be willing to share his story in a public forum. They wanted him to be part of a campaign that would shine a light on racial profiling and the disproportionate treatment of Black people in public spaces. It was a huge opportunity, one that would bring attention to the very issues he had been speaking out against. But it also meant stepping further into the public eye, something Marcus wasn't entirely comfortable with. Still, the need for change outweighed his personal discomfort. He agreed to participate, knowing that his voice, along with the voices of others, could help push the conversation forward. In the following weeks, Marcus became more involved in advocacy work. He attended meetings, wrote op-eds, and shared his story at rallies and forums. His experiences, both personal and as a father, struck a chord with many. People wanted to hear from him, wanted to understand how they could be better allies in the fight for racial equality. His voice became a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. But even as he became more immersed in the movement, Marcus remained focused on his primary goal: his children. He didn't want them to grow up in a world where they were seen as less than. He wanted them to know that, despite the challenges they would face, they had the power to change things. They didn't have to accept the status quo. They could stand up, speak out, and make the world better. One night, as he sat with Jamal and Nadia, Marcus realized just how far they had come. The conversation he had been dreading, the one he had feared would rob his children of their innocence, had, in fact, opened their eyes to the truth of the world. They had learned that there was work to be done, but they had also learned that the fight for equality didn't have to be fought with anger or hatred. It could be fought with compassion, with strength, and with a commitment to justice. "Dad," Jamal said one evening as they sat on the couch, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how we have to keep fighting for what's right. I want to do that too. I want to help." Marcus smiled at his son, his heart swelling with pride. "You will, Jamal. You already are. You just have to keep learning, keep growing, and always remember that your voice matters. You don't have to wait until you're older. Every day, you can make a difference." Nadia, who had been quietly listening, looked up at her father. "We're going to change the world, right, Daddy?" Marcus's heart nearly stopped at her words. She was so young, but she had already understood the power of her voice, of standing up for what was right. "Yes, sweetie, we're going to change the world." In the months that followed, Marcus continued to use his platform to raise awareness and to advocate for change. The movement that had started with a simple post was now a full-fledged campaign, with people from all walks of life coming together to demand justice and equality. And as for Marcus, he knew that this was only the beginning. There would be setbacks, there would be obstacles, but he was ready for them. Because in the end, he knew that change didn't come easy. It came from standing together, from speaking out, from demanding the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. And with that belief firmly in his heart, Marcus Johnson, along with his children, would continue to fight. Together, they would work toward a world where no one was judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The power of unity. As the weeks passed, the fire ignited by Marcus's social media post continued to burn, and the momentum behind the movement grew stronger each day. People were talking, sharing, and acting. What had started as one man's call for respect had turned into a nationwide conversation about racial justice, profiling, and the ways in which society often dehumanized people based on the color of their skin. Marcus's decision to stand up had sparked something much larger than he had ever anticipated. It wasn't just his voice anymore. It was a collective roar demanding change. It was early one morning when Marcus received a call that would change the direction of the movement he had begun. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts as he sat at the kitchen table with his children, sipping on his morning coffee. "Marcus, it's Rachel from the National Civil Rights Coalition." The voice on the other end said, "We've been following your story, and we'd like to invite you to participate in a live discussion on racial profiling next week. It's a chance to share your experience and bring attention to what's happening in communities across the country." Marcus's heart raced. The opportunity to be on such a public platform, to speak to thousands, maybe even millions, of people was both exhilarating and terrifying. But he knew that the chance to make a real difference didn't come often. This wasn't just about him. This was about the future of his children and every other child who was growing up in a world that judged them based on their skin color. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I'll do it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity." When he hung up the phone, he turned to Jamal and Nadia, who had been sitting at the table, waiting. They could tell by the look on their father's face that something big was about to happen. "What's going on, Dad?" Jamal asked, his curiosity evident. "I've been asked to speak at a national discussion about racial profiling," Marcus said, his tone filled with both pride and nervous energy. "I'm going to tell our story. I'm going to make sure people understand what it's like for us, for people like us, who are treated differently because of the color of their skin." Jamal's eyes lit up. "That's amazing, Dad. You're going to tell them what happened to you, right?" "I am," Marcus said, nodding. "And I'm going to tell them about the thousands of other people who have gone through the same thing. It's time for the world to hear our voices." The next week, Marcus traveled to the studio where the discussion would take place. As he stood backstage, preparing to go on, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. His stomach churned, his hands were slightly sweaty, but the overwhelming feeling was one of purpose. He was there for a reason. He was there to make a change. When it was his turn to take the stage, Marcus walked confidently out to the podium. The room was full of influential activists, legal experts, and even celebrities who had rallied around the cause. As he looked out at the crowd, he felt a strange calm wash over him. This wasn't just about him telling his story. This was about the world understanding the pain, the frustration, and the fear that millions of people lived with every single day. The host, a well-known journalist who had covered issues of social justice for years, introduced Marcus with a few words about his story. As the crowd applauded, Marcus stepped forward to the microphone. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady, but his heart beating fast. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be here today. I wasn't sure at first if my story mattered, if it could really make a difference. But now, I know it does." The room grew silent as Marcus continued. "I'm here because I want to speak for the countless people who have been treated unfairly, whether it's in a store, on the street, or yes, even in a mall, just because of how they look. I'm here because I have children, and I want them to grow up in a world where they don't have to be afraid to walk down the street or go to school simply because of the color of their skin." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. The weight of his words seemed to hang in the air as he let them sink in. "I was at the mall with my kids, just trying to enjoy a family day. But because of how I look, because I'm black, I was treated as a criminal. I was stopped by security, questioned, and made to feel like I didn't belong. And what hurt the most wasn't the humiliation I felt. It was watching my children, seeing the confusion and fear in their eyes. It was watching them question if their father was really the man they thought he was." The room was completely silent, save for the soft sound of Marcus's voice. He could feel the collective energy of the crowd, their attention fully on him. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued. "This isn't just about me. This happens every single day, all across this country. Black men, women, and children are constantly judged, constantly questioned, simply because of their skin color. This is what we live with. This is our reality." He paused again, letting his words echo in the room. "So, what do we do about it?" he asked, his voice filled with determination. "We stand up. We speak out. We refuse to be silenced. And we don't just speak for ourselves. We speak for everyone who has been treated this way. We speak for the people who are too afraid to say something. We speak for the ones who have been made to feel invisible." The crowd began to stir, nodding in agreement, some even applauding softly. "I want to challenge everyone here today, and everyone watching at home, to take a good look at the world we live in," Marcus continued. "Look at the systems, the institutions, the people who make decisions every day that affect lives like mine, like yours, like ours. And then ask yourself, are we truly living in a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect? Are we truly living in a world where skin color doesn't determine your worth?" His words rang out, and for a brief moment, Marcus could see the impact they were having. He wasn't just speaking to the people in the room. He was speaking to everyone, everywhere, who had ever been treated as less than because of their race. His message was clear. Change had to come, and it had to come now. As he wrapped up his speech, Marcus took a deep breath. The room was buzzing now, a ripple of energy moving through the audience. There was a sense of unity, a collective realization that the time for change had arrived. People were no longer content to sit on the sidelines. They were ready to act. "I believe we can change this," Marcus said, his voice filled with hope. "But it starts with us. It starts with each of us choosing to see each other, not as the color of our skin, but as human beings. It starts with kindness. It starts with respect. And it starts with us demanding that everyone be treated equally, no matter who they are or where they come from." As Marcus finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was the sound of people acknowledging the truth, the sound of a movement being born. People stood, cheered, and shouted words of support. In that moment, Marcus knew that things were changing. The power of unity was undeniable. When people came together, when they shared their stories, and fought for justice side by side, the impact was unstoppable. Marcus had ignited a spark, but it was the collective efforts of so many that would fuel the fire of change. And as he looked out at the crowd, with Jamal and Nadia watching proudly from the front row, Marcus knew one thing for sure. The fight for respect, dignity, and equality wasn't over. But they were winning, one step at a time.